So, Alex, welcome.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm good. It's been a while.
It has, yes.
One of the
Gosh,
lovely things about doing these is I get to catch up with people I haven't seen for a long time, and it's always cool to see where people have got to after their degrees.
oh yeah, it's nice. It's nice for me to sort of reminisce about good old uni days as well. So
It,
it's
it
nice.
it's funny, I often tell the students that I interviewed a former colleague of yours yesterday, actually, and one of the things I was saying to her is the advice I often give to particularly first years is to enjoy the freedom that they have now as students because you kind of never have that level of freedom again.
Absolutely, yes.
It's
Yes, the unstructured environment that you first get when you go to university out of school was a lot actually. I think because my first degree that I attempted was actually creative arts up at Melbourne Uni, and then I came to you guys a few years after that after I dropped out because I was just still figuring out what I wanted to be when I grew up. So yeah, and ended up at Swinburne, but which was exactly what I needed and loved at the time. But yeah, I think it is. It's just such an enjoyable. I wish I had have spent more time enjoying it than worrying about what subjects I was doing because it's just it's just such a great thing.
it's a bit of a life lesson, isn't it? You don't have to figure out exactly what you want to do with your life at 19.
No, in fact, I didn't start in media until I was 25. I was definitely doing a lot of figuring out, a lot of bit of study. I'd started at Swinburne and then went backpacking. So you may recall, Mark, you saw me a few times, or over probably a decade, you might have seen my face around. Because I was full time, and then I went backpacking for a year, and really figured out when I hit London at that time that it was the first time I lived in London, but without a degree or without a sort of a career or that sort of trajectory, I felt like I was doing myself a disservice. So when I came back to Australia, I was very determined to come back and get the credits aligned and finish my media comms degree with you guys. Yeah.
So you're currently working as a communications consultant, but you've had a range of different roles over the last few years, haven't you?
Yeah, definitely. So, I guess 17 years in media, 16 of which in agency land. So, for a media agency, and the way I used always describe media agencies is it's advertising, but there's the creative agencies that make the pictures and tell the stories, and then there's the media agencies who spend all the money. So, my role, throughout those 16 years definitely changed a lot. I think my career could be categorized as one of curiosity. So I actually moved around, probably a lot more into different streams than is particularly now. It's people sort of seem to go into sort of one sort of silo of agency, whether it's trading or planning and sort of stick to that. For me, I guess I had the benefit of working in a full service agency to start with. So yeah, back when I was 25, and this was 2007, just to age myself. And that was, I started, and it was a, very, very small mum and pop kind of marketing agency. And they just opened up a media arm, so it was just me and one media director, and so I got to do everything from straight away, which is very unheard of. Usually if you join a media agency to start with, you'll start as a coordinator, lots of admin. You'll get exposed to lots of different things, but the day-to-day work can be, a bit monotonous, although hopefully AI has sorted that out by now. But it's, it is definitely that entry level feel, whereas I was good doing that and then, reaching up into different spaces. And so then I moved to Icon, to do TV trading, on Maya, which was, I wanted to be a real girl, a real trader and buying media. And that was really intense, really full on. You can imagine how much money media, Maya was spending on TV. And this is,
Mm.
like peak TV was when Seven Mate had just started and everyone was still watching. It was very easy to get critical reach through there. So that was really stressful, but really good. But then I moved within that organization because I recognized in myself that I was missing the planning side of it, which is actually, what we sort of say, deciding which channels to put things into, the more strategic side. So I changed teams within there. And then ultimately that direction led me to the agency OMD. And I was working on roadshow films there, as my key account, doing planning and a bit of strategy and account management, client management, bit of an all rounder. Was there for a couple of years, then wanted to go to London again and sort of realize that vision that I'd had from, I had unfinished business with the city, I guess, because I'd been there doing temp work previously. And I thought, no, I'll be back. And so came back as media agency and joined OMD UK there. And this is like another sort of mini pivot, is that I'd gone from working on roadshow films, which is I really, as you can imagine, it's, films coming out, you've got to spend a whole lot of money, get it, I was working on The Hobbit, on the Lego movie and big movies like that. And you spend a whole lot all at once and I moved into the performance team at OMD UK. So that's where you're really focusing on search or display media, trying to get conversions, or drilling down into optimizing daily. And so it was a huge learning curve for me there, and one that was a real turning point, and one that I look back on in my career, with lots of it's definitely an area that was really good and really bad for me at the same time. But we can unpack that more in a minute. But then I moved from OMD UK to Cara UK and Cara Global, working on the Lego account there. And that was incredible. Definitely one of my career highlights, working in the Lego Global team. And then I got, Brexit happened, and there was just sort of starting to sort of feel it's been about almost 4 years. Moved back to Melbourne, bounced back in briefly to work on roadshow films for a bit, and then ultimately settled at Group M at then called MediaCom, working mostly on FMCG accounts, so things you buy in the supermarket, and Mars in particular, so Mars Wrigley, which is like extra gum and Mars bars and
Yep.
Maltesers and that kind of stuff. So, and worked with them for 5 years. And that really, they've got a really, really strong training. They've got Mars University. So I've really, that leveled up my marketing, beyond just, had quite strong skills in media and media planning, but that took it to the next level, and partnering with them. And then went off and had a baby, and then worked a little bit more there, and then moved over to Roadshow Films. I wanted to take my marketing knowledge, and put it to use client side, as we say. And so, yeah, back with my old friends at Roadshow, which is a real passion point. I studied cinema, and it's funny how much that doesn't come in use as much as you think when you work in the movies. In fact,
Yeah.
we actively don't hire people who are like major cinephiles. My partner is the one that knows every director that ever whatever, and I often don't remember if I've even seen the film. Anyway, and so really enjoyed that time. But yeah, unfortunately, what is a reality in business, and is actually a common occurrence in media agencies and creative agencies, is that redundancies took place, and my role was one of those that was impacted in that. And so, yeah, I'm in the middle of consulting now, which has been a really interesting road as well. So there's, setting up a business and talking to your accountant, but then working out what your product is. And being a
Mm.
generalist, there was a few things I could turn my hand to, but media planning, I would say, has been the skill that is I'm most well known for, sort of creative ideas through media. Gosh, that was a long answer too.
Wow. No, like there is so much to unpack there. I mean, the first thing that strikes me is you've been in this business, at the center of this business, through probably the biggest change in media we've seen in the last 50 years.
Yeah.
So like you were right in the middle when we went from like what we now call legacy media
Mhm.
through the rise of social.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
was that scary internally? Like, so when advertising revenues started dropping off for TV and things like that, as companies started moving more towards social, how was that being on the inside?
Look, I think it's probably happened um, far later than perhaps you would think. Like, certainly, I would say it was press and magazine money that moved into
Mm,
social. So when you talk about just roles of channel, as a planner, you go, what does this channel? We used to talk about, we want to start a conversation, and that was kind of the press and magazine sort of territory, where it's like, where are people getting their ideas they want to talk to their friends about? And so that's definitely where money shifted from first. Because those of us, although there's a lot more now, a lot fewer back in those days, that were actually testing TV effectiveness, is that actually even now it's actually still one of the strongest ROI channels. And so Um, so for the bigger brands, they are still there is a reduction obviously in that space, but it's holding. The effectiveness is holding in that. So I think that there is a lag on it coming off from TV, but now, and post COVID in particular, where we see uh, such a stark difference between younger audiences and older audiences and where their attention is, then yeah, it's moved a lot. I think whether or not it's scary, I think that you'll find that there's the issue with it is starting to be really realized, which is that that money is going into walled gardens offshore rather than
Mm.
going into paying for the newspapers and the mastheads to actually keep running. I think probably too little too late in a lot of ways, because it is very, very, I guess addictive is maybe the wrong word, but when the CPMs that you get provided to, so the cost pers, to reach an audience through the social channels is so efficient, or is reported to you as being so efficient, then you're like, well, why wouldn't I? And the targeting feels so granular. So there's a lot of this it's a big shiny thing that you want to spend a lot of money in, and it's taken a lot of time, for the planners and the traders of the world to start to really unpick some of the numbers that you get back from some of the large social media players around how much do you need to spend in order to get to the same level of efficacy as something like TV.
Mm.
There's viewability issues. There's even within strong walled gardens where you can be sure of the data, actually, to actually stop a thumb, but you might still, they could scroll past, but still get
Yeah.
charged for that impression. And so trying to balance that out has been a big part of my career, is what we call, like, the video stack. So it's always about how can we reach the most amount of incremental audience, and use all of these different levers at different weights and frequencies so that they're playing on a level playing field. So I don't think that there's as much worry until recently, when it's also that the funding that goes into some of those big ones, yeah, is no, I think there's a real turning point for big companies to want to spend less there, to try and keep more money into Australian media.
It's a really interesting point you make about CPM, because we kind of take that as the gold standard now, and you do get a sense of impressions,
Yeah.
but as you say, the efficacy of that is still debatable.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So we used to have there's a couple of different, so eCPM or QCPM, which is like the effective CPM or the quality CPM. And so you can actually add some multipliers. So you can add your viewability like multiplier, or so you times it by, okay, well, and you have to kind of, so there's studies that you can use and go, okay, well, TV is about 80% viewable because people might have gone and made a cup of tea, or they're not watching that kind of thing. And for different audiences, you can dial that down or up. You can go, okay, well, for younger people, their second screen is let's make it lower. So you try and get to a place where you're like more comfortable with that. But then you can also talk to other areas of quality, like attention and those sorts of things. So, and quality of production as well sometimes can be a factor. Screen size is another one. So cinema obviously really wins in that category. And in fact, if you include screen size, cinema is the most efficient of all of all channels, which is by far and away it is not
Mm.
in regular trading circumstances. But it just goes to show that you have to be really thinking about the medium as the message, as we know, Marshall McLuhan. It
I
all comes
know.
around. It all comes around.
I know what you mean. I used to work for Val Morgan
Oh gosh,
myself,
yeah, right, yeah,
and the message that we always used to put out there is, it's the most effective medium because the screen is so large and you've got a captive audience, but you
yeah.
don't, because they're not watching the ads, they're
They're
talking
buying.
to their friends or eating
Well, they're at the
popcorn.
candy bar. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
So
The,
yes.
but you talked about, you just raised McLuhan, and it sort of leads me into my next question. So you
Mm.
did um, cinema major or cinema degree when you were at Swinburne. Was that was that actually important in terms of your career, or was it just something that you found interesting? And you can
Yeah,
be honest.
No, so I think I did cinema studies, but I don't think I did it as my major. I think it was sociology. However, that comes. I was like sociology in an electronic society or
Oh,
something,
yep.
something to that effect. And look, I think on the whole, I would say there's no one thing that I learnt at university that was vocationally driven that like made me go, okay, yeah, I've learnt this, I can apply it there. But my minor was in philosophy, and I think that um, I love seeing on candidate applications that they've got critical thinking within that. I'm from the old school kind of university thinking of like, university being just to fill your cup of learning and figure out how to assess things. And I think that's even more important these days with the rate of change. Like,
Mm.
understanding how to work with AI, for instance, is like or even that understand how to construct a sort of an ethical viewpoint around what you're moving into. But cinema studies, look, I love doing it. I think it was, I'd come from creative arts and I'd studied drama and acting and filmmaking. So I enjoyed that space. But it's not necessarily something that drove, maybe, I think it probably helped sometimes in being able to talk about films with clients and but the real sort of cinephile or the real sort of or even understanding, is it diegetic or non-diegetic, like that stuff never never
No.
comes up really until, I mean, maybe in working with producers and studio heads from time to time, being able to drop in that you were like a little bit in the know was helpful. But no, in reality it was a nice to have, not a necessity at all.
And, and I think you made the point before, companies like Roadshow sometimes avoid, people with, really strong cinema backgrounds because they're too much into it.
Yes, indeed. In fact, so I mean, marketing in general, we always sort of talk about like and media planning as well, is that you need to recognize that you are not the audience. And so when you're
Mm.
working with large sets of audience data, um, in fact, one of the things I used to do with people that I would train would have the Roy Morgan system, and I'd say, okay, try and build yourself, like as much as close as you can, or whatever representational, and then I want to compare yourself to all of Australia, and usually, in a Melbourne kind of advertising uh, lens, you start to really highlight to people that the attitudes that we have, the things that the media that we use, the way we vote or whatever it is, can be really, really different to the people that we might be wanting to most impact.
Mm.
And I think that's, the same goes with understanding film. It's like, well, you might really, really know that this director did this and this, that, the other thing, and there's all these Easter eggs or whatever. And it's like, ultimately we're trying to convert the masses to like, what's the one big thing? And it's like, oh, it's Jason Statham. Boom, there you go. Like,
Yeah.
it's just, what's
Yeah.
the hook? And so you've got to really be able to step back and understand what is the thing that's going to like uh, help that particular audience, not what necessarily interests you. Sometimes those things overlap, or it can help to drive it. And obviously, being passionate about what you work with is also helpful, because most people don't like to sell things they don't like. So there's just a balance there. Yeah, we used to get a lot of resumes from producers and people who were wanting to get into roadshow to be filmmakers, and that was definitely a no. That's not what this is.
It it's an interesting point, and I love how you phrased it. You're not the audience.
Yeah.
Because like when I used to teach games design, we'd often get 19-year-olds that just want to make the next version of the game they really love.
Mm,
When
mm,
the game they'll have to make is, Barbie's Horse Adventures or something like that.
yeah. Great.
And you often have to do stuff that you don't want to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's life, right? That's like, that is having a career, but that's also like being strategic. So I think that's where you need to, that's part of maturing into a career, is particularly marketing, is understanding your passion, what you get value out of is the task at hand, not the end result, if that makes sense. So
Yep.
yeah, you might be building Barbie's horse adventure, and I'm not really into either of those things, but I'm really into my client is loving it, and we're seeing the numbers grow, and the the top line or the bottom line is doing what it needs to do. So it's, there's other things that start to inspire you more than the creative thing itself. But yeah.
I was just thinking about the different roles you've had, across two continents, basically.
Mm.
Um, were those, as you jumped from role to role, were they advertised or was it a networking thing primarily?
Uh, Networking. I so currently I've been sort of, zhuzhing up my resume to sort of for the consultancy business as well, but also having a look at what's out there. And I've realized that I haven't actually had to apply for a job since I moved from between agencies in London. So that was in 2017 was the last time I actually needed a resume. I've needed it after the fact. So when I joined Roadshow, I had already had all my interviews, and then it was more of a almost always having a resume was that after the fact we need one for the files kind of thing, for someone somewhere needs to just know that the HR team want to have your resume on file. um it is 100%, media and marketing is all about networking. It is the single most important thing, and not just in getting a job in media. Gosh, like this, the important, I cannot stress the importance of your network, building rapport. So when I was trading TV, for instance, this is back in the day when we used to have telephones at our desks, and I'd be calling Channel 9 trying to pull in favors because it's, some show that we're needing to, we've got, maybe Givenchy have come in with Maya and they're going to do another campaign and we have to do things that day, so you're pulling favors. um and then on the flip side, some you have to sort of, there's a bit of a back and forth with that, and so there's that, you can't always be calling in favors, but so you have to, particularly on the trading side of things, sometimes that's really really helpful. But also just getting things done. When I was in the performance team actually in the UK, I remember um it was Friday afternoon, and a campaign for some reason hadn't gone live. There was something kind of technical with the tags hadn't been set up properly, and they needed to be re-trafficked, and it was just an absolute disaster. And the client was upset because it wasn't, and I was the client lead at the time, and I go, oh God, and I was still at the office, and this is in the UK, Friday afternoon in the office. It is a ghost town because
Yeah.
they're all down the pub. And I was, it was nigh on 5:30, 6 o'clock, and it was just like, oh, okay. And everyone's well gone by that stage. Okay, and I just had to down tools because I couldn't get hold of anyone, and I was pretty dejected, and had a pretty, had to have a call with the client to be like, oh, this is where we're at. So I go to the pub, thinking I was going to drown my sorrows in a pint, and lo and behold, I get there, and here's the guy from Acuin, which is like the trade desk, and I've got here's the guy from the Daily Mirror, Daily Mail, and all of the different people who I needed, including even the ad ops team. So I was like, you, and I grabbed them, and they all just sat there, and we made it happen, right? And so it was
Oh,
just
that's
the fact
cool.
that I was, yeah, I mean, it's just funny, right? And that's particularly British way of doing things. Um, but it just goes to show, yeah, that like being able to go, oh, yeah, I know all the people and I know them by face, and yeah,
And it's funny that you mentioned the phone because it's something I'm hearing from employers now that they're looking for people that can use telephones,
yeah,
and it's kind of bizarre, but we've, trained ourselves into just texting everything.
yeah,
And when the phone rings, we panic.
yes,
And and there are lots of occasions where you actually just need to pick up the phone and do it right there and then. And I think,
yeah.
yeah, that's something we're losing as a skill set.
Yeah, I think, especially in a career where things get so timely, like if you're in a position where you're, implementing a campaign and things need to go live, or you're trying to, in marketing, it's like you've got to be that conductor of the orchestra where you're trying to get everything happening at the same time. People need to be able to contact you, and you need to be able to like, ugh. And that definitely, has shifted towards, and that's, I mean, there is still an enormous amount of texting and and obviously Teams chatting and stuff between colleagues and media owners. But I would say that, yeah, there's definitely a time, and I think for and it sounds bad to say it sometimes, but like for career progression, the people that were more senior than me are generally a little bit older, and are much more likely to be, wanting to have a phone call. And so if they come up against someone who is not comfortable with a phone call, there can be a real disconnect, and a real it can look not great on, even
Mm.
though you might be an absolute, you know workhorse, fabulous staff member. But if you're not willing to just have a conversation, yeah, that can be a challenge.
You've mentioned AI a couple of times, and I think, from what you're saying, the two topics are kind of connected because it feels like the more AI takes, certain aspects of these roles, the
Mm.
more important interpersonal skills become.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I often, I think, AI definitely from a media planning perspective will come in and do a lot of the Excel sheets that we've all done, will come in and do them way better. And the number crunching, I guess, even if there will still need to be some nuance of how to brief it into the machine to get the right thing. But I always talk, when I was leading the planning team at Essence MediaCom, I used to talk about what's the brief behind the brief, because sometimes, there's the clients will want something in particular, but it's also important to understand where are they at in their career. Like, our job as an agency is not just to get the job done, it's often also to help the client with where they're going, and that's, for their career, because that's, deepens your relationships, deepens your partnerships with them. There's a much greater amount of trust if you have a long-term relationship with someone, and it's, mutually beneficial, where we're going, okay, well, we're doing great work, but how can I angle a couple of different things that's going to help you get where you need to go. So those elements, is something that AI, at least for now, it's very much, that understanding, or it's going and having a beer with your client after a campaign and saying, oh, yep, and understanding exactly, where they're at with stuff that they might not ever tell you in a meeting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, one something that Maddie said in the previous interview, it's kind of like an assistant, but at the end of the day, you've still got to do the work.
Yeah, and I think there'll be elements of where it's going to start doing the work for us, but it's always going to be, yeah, like you're going to have to be driving, and understanding it. I think it's going to level up. One of the benefits, I guess, of my media degree is understanding and having a really strong belief that this is just as the printing press, just as, we would take these big leaps, you know. What of our cognitive function is this going to free up for us, if we get to the other side? Or maybe not the other side, but as we grow with it. So what can we start, taking away? And that's, for me, I guess, is the watch out, is that, a lot of people are applying it to the creative pursuits, or to things where you go, no, actually, I think that's the human part. Can we spend a bit more time nutting out the admin? Because that's the stuff.
Yeah.
Because I think we would be in like an absolute world of horrors if the admin is being done by humans, and the artwork and strategy is being done by the machine. So yeah, no.
I saw this meme the other day, and it said, all the visions we had of what robotics would do in the future, we didn't imagine that they would be the creative ones.
Yeah, no.
You
And I
know
think
that.
yeah, I really hope that that's not where it nets out. I think it's great that we can see those sorts of things, but I think it's still a bit uncanny valley, and it's still, I think that there will be things, us as humans, yeah, there'll be some that we connect to as emotionally, but I think that we'll start to filter out the human work versus the not. It'll become a blend. It'll become a blend. Yeah.
I was thinking the other day, I was preparing a presentation for an overseas university, and I was trying to explain the difference between the sort of, broad conceptual stuff that we do at uni versus the practical skills. Because when I
Hmm.
talk to a lot of students, they just want the practical skills, and they don't
Hmm.
see a lot of value in the more conceptual theoretical stuff. But the thing I've begun to realize is that, when you're starting off in a career, the theory stuff not going to have any impact whatsoever.
Hmm.
But the longer you're in a career, the more the big picture stuff starts kicking in. Is that what you found?
Um. Hmm. I. I mean, I didn't do. I mean, I didn't study. Then the thing that I wish I had have paid more attention to and studied more of is the one compulsory unit I had, which was statistics.
Yeah.
Because that is such a huge part of my world. And in fact, now wanting to, sorry, I've got something in my eye. Wanting to do more into that space, and data and analytics is such a huge part of understanding effectiveness, and I wish that I had a bit more. I have a real passion for it now, but I wish I had a much stronger base, and I think I'll probably go back and do some short courses in
Mm.
that space. So I think, that's not necessarily big picture, but it is in a way. Do I think, I mean, I didn't study anything practical from a media perspective, or as far as vocational, but it is more about, I think, yeah, I know, I think it's like there's critical thinking elements, and everything else
Mm.
was on the job for me. But yeah, being able to see things for what they are or what they could be is definitely what I got from uni. Yeah.
You said before that you did some philosophy at uni. So if you see someone coming along with philosophy on their transcript, would you be predisposed to
Absolutely.
hiring them?
Yes, yes. And in fact, one of the best hires that I've made, that I'm most proud of, is a guy. When I was working in London, I was hiring grads, and he had read, I think, economics or politics, one of the two, and had minored in philosophy as well. So he was really well educated, but very much in a rounded non-media. And my boss at the time said, "Oh, I'm not sure this. He's very well educated, but I'm not sure he's going to want to be a grad or doing coordinator work or whatever it was." And I said, "Well, let's meet him." And anyway, he was, yeah, fabulous brain and nice, super nice guy. And he's gone on to, I think he's very, very high up in Unilever Europe, and already, like, he's had a fabulous career because he had the ability to understand the world around him, see what was going on, and flex his thinking and navigate through things. If I see philosophy on a resume, I'm, yes, very, very. You're at least going to get an interview, that's for sure, because it tells me that you're interested in thinking about things.
I will tell
Mm.
my colleagues in philosophy that. I'm sure they'll be
Yeah,
very glad to
definitely.
hear.
Yeah.
Um, so more broadly, so we've talked a little bit about wanting to do more or stats at uni. Is there anything else you wished you would have learned as a student, either like professionally or personally?
It's a good question. It is hard to say because I was doing it concurrently. I think I I mean, I didn't go to university wanting the commercial side of things, but I think, if I were now enrolling in a media career, or media course, I think perhaps understanding P&Ls. I don't know how much you go into that if you're like running a client team, and understanding the dark arts potentially of actually managing, um, headcounts versus revenue versus billings, and having to account for overheads and what that can look like. Even just having that kind of context as you move into a media agency helps you understand some of the pressures that the people more senior than you, are having. I think
Mm.
probably when I was younger, I was perhaps more focused. I've always been very, very driven by the work, which sounds weird. I think that everybody would be, but I've always been such a craft person of wanting to get the campaign right, and I get frustrated by the politics or whatever else is going on. But I think a better understanding of the commercial pressures, as much as is possible, could have been helpful, for me. But yeah, I think I was
It,
already a little bit attuned to the big bad world before I got in there. As I said, I didn't start till I was 25. So I'd had a few other jobs, and I was very lucky to realize that I was extraordinarily lucky to work in media as my career, because some of the alternatives, weren't nearly as fun. There was a
it,
lot of fun
it,
to be had.
and it's a great lifestyle, particularly if you're in that agency space where
Yeah.
you do get to meet a lot of really interesting people.
Yeah.
I was just going to say it's interesting that the point you make about things you would have liked to have learned, that that sort of idea of understanding the business pressures is
Mm.
actually what this unit is all
All right.
about.
Okay.
We
Great.
we we introduced this probably 10 years ago now,
Okay.
specifically because students would think of media as consumers, but they wouldn't think of the
Mm.
business angle.
Yeah.
And that's why we created this thing, just to focus specifically on understanding media as an economic enterprise.
Yes. Yeah. And it has, and it's, it's a rich tapestry of the different layers of, I guess, commerciality within the media ecosystem. So there's obviously the cost of media space within that, and then the cost to resource agencies or produce the ads themselves, or what have you. But then there's layers above that, of course, when you
Mm,
start to look at the pressures of, big themes now around principal media, and the act of meta trading, I guess, is a term for it, and that's opened up the discussion around, what is the bigger commercial pressures sometimes, of like, how do some of the bigger agencies use the cash that they're holding in certain areas as well. So
mm.
it is a big business, big global business. So it's very interesting, the different layers as you go up. But being a big global business also makes that it's really mobile, which is also a great reason to get into media, because yeah, it's pretty
Mm.
transferable. It's the same most places. There's obviously different media landscape. There'll be different publishers and things to meet, but in general, it's, yeah,
It
pretty lift and shift.
it feels like I set this interview up because my other unit this semester is called Global Media,
Oh, there you
which
go.
which does the other side of things.
Yeah,
So
I would have liked. I wish that would have been good for me to know, because I think I was really nervous. I was probably too nervous about thinking that everything was going to be different in London. And I touched on it earlier about why that was my move to London was a real shift for me, was because I wasn't prepared for how the same it would be. And I know that
yeah,
sounds really silly, but
yeah, no,
I got there thinking like, oh, I need, it's going to be so much more suited and booted, or that I needed to be. And I was used to, I was riding high on, like, it was pretty casual in general media. Like, it's, for the most part, depending on, some of the more senior leads might occasionally put on a blazer, like, but it's pretty cash. And actually it was more so in London. But I showed up with and a bit of a persona that I was going to be, like, wearing dresses and high heels, and I was like, that's just not, it's just, for anyone that knows me, and it's just not who I was. And in fact, so moving into then that performance team, which was a sort of a style of media I hadn't done before, with a persona that wasn't really me, I didn't, this is, I often talk about, this is the time in my career where I failed pretty hard, because I didn't make friends in the agency. Like, I had a few mates, and I got along okay. Like, I wasn't bullied or anything, but it was just, I just didn't, like, I was used to having my mates. It was because media is work hard, play hard, and I just didn't ever quite get there with that. And so it made everything harder, and I didn't understand, and I just could never quite put the genie back in the bottle, that I wasn't like a weird, like, high heel wearing, like, I just didn't, I don't know, it's very strange to explain. And then the minute I changed, and I moved over to a different agency and working on Lego, I was just like, oh, if it doesn't work, I'll go home. Or I think I just had just understood that I just need to be who I am. And it was like night and day. And it was like, there was, a couple of Aussies on the team there, but so that helped a little bit. But also just found my people. And I would say that the biggest advice I could give to anyone working in anywhere in media is that it is 100% about the people that you're working with, which that will determine how you go. Because there'll be teams that you gel with, or that you're the right fit for, but there'll be teams that aren't, and that's okay, because they'll find each other, and the others find each other. And so even within the same agency, they'll be like, oh, this account runs this way, and this account runs this way, and they're, and it's all horses for courses in a lot of ways. And you get to, and oftentimes that is helpful to understand what the client is like too, because that'll generally kind of reflect the way that the client approaches things as well. And so my recommendation to anyone is to focus on, like, how, what's your working style, communicate that, sort of like, talk to people about that. Like, for me, I often talk to new people. I'm a verbal processor, so I like to just spitball and say things out loud. Some people don't work that way, and so you need to be really clear about yeah, how you go about things. Because if you land in the wrong spot, I think my mistake was that I stayed there too long. I was like
mm.
really bloody minded around, like, oh no, I want to succeed. I'll work harder. I'll work harder, and hard work is important. But sometimes it's actually just find the right people and get in your groove. Yeah.
And from the sound of it, a bit about authenticity as well. So be authentic to yourself.
100%. So, there's a big, we often talk about values or being values driven in your career and the way of working. And authenticity is my number one because I can sort of talk to that moment and that feeling of like, "Oh, if I had have just been myself, I would not have gone down that road. I would have been able to, yeah, approach things much more differently and had a much better time. Who doesn't want to move to London and have, I still had lots of fun, don't get me wrong, and I actually made a lot of friends outside of work. And that's probably worth touching on too, is that media, because it's so mobile, there's lots of people traveling from around the world who, and by virtue of socializing a lot together, there's a lot of big friendships are formed, probably more so than in other workplaces, because yeah, there's lots of young people going out on the town with media owners or whatever,
Uh,
and so yeah, I think it's find your people and you'll go a long way. Yeah.
well, look, I think that is a perfect note to end on because I think that's exactly what people sitting in my class this week need to hear. Because, a lot of cases, you're trying to figure out what your professional persona is, and you can sometimes subsume your actual persona within it. So I think that's a really good and valuable piece of advice.
Yeah, don't show up wearing a shirt and tie if you're going
Yep.
into a media agency. That's for sure. You can
Yep.
spot the new recruits day one. We're like, nope.
Well, well, look, I think that's yeah, that is a great thing to finish off. I'm not wearing my suit and tie today, so I'm okay for now.
Perfect.
Um, we'll wrap it up there. I'll get you to hang on just for a few minutes, but just before we sign off, I just wanted to thank you again for doing this. I think this has been invaluable info for the students.
You're welcome. All the best to everyone. Cheers.
Thanks, mate.